Daniel had always imagined that working in a museum would feel quiet, peaceful, and almost dreamlike, filled with soft footsteps and gentle whispers from visitors admiring artwork. On his first day as an intern, he walked through the tall glass doors of the city museum with a mix of excitement and nerves. The air inside was cool, carrying the faint smell of polished floors and old books. He straightened his badge, pushed his glasses up his nose, and tried to look confident, even though his heart thumped with the energy of a beginner wanting to do everything right. He checked in at the front desk, expecting someone to guide him, but instead found himself standing among a group of security guards in navy uniforms. They looked focused, strong, and very used to their routines. Daniel felt slightly out of place in his simple shirt and notebook tucked under his arm. He kept telling himself that this was normal. Everyone felt new on their first day. A man stepped forward from the group. He had silver hair, calm eyes, and the kind of posture that spoke of years of experience. This was Morris, the senior guard. His expression was kind, but serious, as if he had spent a lifetime noticing details others missed. He introduced himself with a handshake that was firm but gentle. Daniel felt immediately safer around him, even though he didn't quite know why. The morning briefing began. The guard spoke about visitor flow, areas that needed extra attention, and how to stay alert without making guests uncomfortable. Daniel listened carefully, scribbling notes he wasn't sure he fully understood yet. The museum, he learned, depended on quiet teamwork. Security wasn't only about keeping things safe, but also about making visitors feel welcome and calm. It was like a dance. Everyone played a part, even if the steps weren't obvious. When the meeting ended, Daniel noticed Morris watching him with a thoughtful look. The older guard motioned for him to come over. Daniel stepped closer, curious. Morris studied him for a moment, then nodded as if confirming a private thought. "You're new," he said in a gentle voice, "and new people sometimes miss things that others have learned over the years." Daniel expected advice about checking badges or helping visitors. Instead, Morris leaned slightly closer, not in a secretive way, but in a way that made Daniel pay attention. "If you ever feel unsure or confused," Morris said, "watch the guard's right foot." Daniel blinked. "Watch the guard's right foot?" He repeated the words softly, wondering if he had heard them correctly. Morris nodded. Daniel wanted to ask what that meant, but something in the older man's calm expression made him hold the question back. It didn't seem like a joke, though the idea sounded strange. Why would anyone need to look at a guard's foot? Shouldn't signals come from hand gestures or a radio? Morris didn't explain further. He simply gave Daniel a small smile, the kind that hinted he would understand soon enough. Although Daniel didn't get the full meaning, he felt a spark of curiosity. He tucked the advice away in his mind, unsure when he would ever need such a thing. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of new experiences. Daniel followed guards around, learning how they checked exhibits, guided visitors politely, and stayed alert without seeming stiff or unfriendly. There was a gentle rhythm to everything. The guards didn't talk much to each other. They communicated with nods, soft eye contact, and quiet movements that said more than words. Daniel thought back to Morris's odd comment. He watched the guards more closely now, curious if their feet held some kind of secret. But nothing looked unusual. They walked normally, stood in polite rest positions, and moved with casual ease. Still, Daniel caught himself glancing at their right feet more often than not, hoping to catch something meaningful. During lunch, he sat in the small break room with his sandwich, thinking about the morning. A couple of guards chatted nearby about their families and weekend plans. Everything seemed normal. Daniel wondered why Morris had given him advice that felt so mysterious. Maybe it was simply an old habit, something passed down like a tradition but not actually useful anymore. He shrugged and decided not to worry too much. After lunch, Morris found him again. The senior guard wasn't someone who spoke without purpose. Every word felt chosen, every gesture thoughtful. This time, he didn't look quite as serious as before. Instead, he seemed to be observing Daniel with a quiet interest, checking how well the new intern was adjusting. "You did well today," Morris said, Most people rush. You didn't. Daniel felt a warm glow of pride. Thank you. I'm trying to learn everything. That's good. Morris paused, then added gently, learning doesn't always come from looking up. Sometimes it comes from looking down. Daniel smiled politely, though he still didn't understand. He wondered if this was connected to the right foot comment. Morris seemed to notice Daniel's confusion, but didn't offer any further explanation. Instead, he gave another small nod, as if satisfied with the moment. The afternoon brought new tasks. Daniel helped staff guide school groups and answered simple questions from visitors. He learned how to speak in a friendly yet professional manner. He watched as guards walked their routes, appearing calm but always aware. He admired their ability to notice everything without seeming tense. At one point, Daniel stood near a display while a steady stream of guests moved through the gallery. A guard nearby shifted his weight slightly to the right, but Daniel didn't think much of it. It looked like a normal movement, something anyone might do after standing in one place for a long time. Still, he remembered Morris's words again. Was this one of those moments? Was he supposed to understand something? Daniel watched quietly from a respectful distance. The guard's face remained calm, but something in the way he stood seemed purposeful. Daniel tried to read the meaning, but couldn't. And just like that, the guard walked on, leaving Daniel wondering if he had missed something important. By the time the day ended, Daniel felt pleasantly tired. His feet ached slightly, but his mind buzzed with new impressions. The museum had a life of its own, a steady heartbeat created by people who loved the place and treated it with care. He felt grateful to be part of it. As he prepared to leave for the day, Morris passed by, giving him a nod that felt almost like a quiet farewell. Daniel returned the gesture with a smile. Part of him wanted to ask again about the right foot. Another part felt that maybe he shouldn't ask. Maybe he needed to discover the answer through experience. Walking out the large glass doors, Daniel glanced back at the museum. The building looked peaceful, glowing softly with evening light. He wondered what tomorrow would bring and whether he would finally understand the strange, simple advice Morris had given him. For now, it remained a mystery. But it was a gentle one, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Not with fear or stress, but with quiet observation and growing awareness. And as he walked away, he realized he was already watching more closely. Not because he had to, but because the museum invited curiosity. It taught him to notice, to pay attention, to see things others might overlook. Perhaps, he thought, that was the true beginning of understanding. Daniel returned to the museum the next morning with a quiet sense of excitement. Although his first day had been mostly calm, he couldn't stop thinking about Morris's strange advice. It echoed in his mind like a small bell that refused to fade away. Watch the guard's right foot. It was such an unusual sentence that Daniel found himself smiling at the thought of it. Maybe today he would understand it a little better. The museum was already beginning to fill with visitors when he arrived. School groups gathered near the entrance, families tucked maps into their pockets, and elderly guests walked slowly, admiring the beautiful architecture even before stepping inside. Daniel loved watching this first wave of people enter. It felt like the museum was waking up, stretching its arms to welcome the world. He greeted a few staff members as he made his way to the security office. The guards were preparing for their rounds, adjusting their uniforms, checking visitor lists, and chatting softly. They all seemed relaxed, but Daniel noticed something new today. Every guard stood with a gentle readiness, like someone who could notice small things without forcing themselves to look for them. It was a kind of natural awareness, the kind Morris seemed to embody so effortlessly. Morris himself appeared moments later, carrying a small cup of tea and moving with his usual calmness. When he saw Daniel, he smiled in a way that felt warm and inviting. "Ready for another day?" he asked. "Yes," Daniel replied, holding his notebook. "I'm trying to observe more today." "That's good," Morris said. "Most people only see what's big and obvious, but real understanding comes from noticing what others overlook." The words made Daniel think. He wondered if the right foot advice had something to do with noticing these subtle things. Maybe today, he would finally see the hidden meaning behind it. After the morning briefing, Daniel was paired with a guard named Helen. She was friendly, with bright eyes that always seemed to be smiling. Even when her face was still, she walked with a smooth confidence and greeted everyone, visitors, staff, even the cleaning crew, like she had known them for years. Daniel liked her immediately. "Just stick close," she told him kindly. "And don't worry about getting everything perfect right away. You'll learn by watching." Daniel nodded, grateful for her patience. They walked through the first-floor gallery, where paintings lined the walls like windows into other times. Visitors took pictures, whispered to each other, and stood in quiet admiration. Helen answered their questions politely and kept her eyes moving without seeming restless. Daniel watched her closely, trying to catch anything unusual about her movements. Nothing stood out at first. Her steps were steady. She checked corners naturally. She didn't seem to send any signals with her feet or shoes. Still, Daniel kept observing. Just in case, they moved toward the sculpture wing next. It was quieter there, with soft lighting and tall stone figures that looked almost alive. A few visitors walked around slowly, their footsteps echoing gently through the room. Helen stood at an angle where she could see most of the space without blocking anyone's view. Daniel stood nearby, watching both her and the guests. After a few minutes, Helen shifted her weight slightly. Her right foot turned outward, just a tiny bit, barely noticeable unless someone was paying close attention. Daniel's eyes widened. Was this one of the signals Morris mentioned? But nothing dramatic happened. A couple walked by, smiling as they looked at a large marble sculpture. A museum guide led a small group through the room, talking softly. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Daniel frowned slightly. If the foot movement meant something, he couldn't tell what it meant. It looked so natural, almost like she was just adjusting her stance. Maybe he was imagining things. But then he remembered what Morris had said about learning from things that weren't obvious. Helen eventually stepped forward to greet a visitor who seemed a little lost. She pointed them in the right direction and returned to her spot. Daniel still felt unsure, but he decided to keep watching. As the morning continued, Daniel noticed more small patterns. Different guards moved through the museum, each with their own rhythm. Some walked in smooth lines. Others paused more often to scan the room. A few stood near doorways with quiet focus. Every once in a while, one of them would shift their right foot in a specific way. A slight turn, a backward tap, a steady placement. It was never dramatic or sudden. It always looked like something someone might do without thinking. But when Daniel began to watch more closely, he realized these movements were not random. Helen, for example, placed her right foot slightly forward when the room became crowded. Almost like she was preparing to step in gently if someone needed help. Another guard, Thomas, tapped the tip of his right shoe softly when a group of kids started wandering too close to a delicate exhibit. The children didn't even notice. But Daniel saw how the gesture made two other guards glance over for a moment, then relax when they saw things were under control. Daniel was fascinated. It was like discovering a new language, one that existed in plain sight but remained invisible unless someone taught you how to look. And now, he was beginning to understand. The guards didn't rely only on radios or calls. They used tiny movements to communicate, forming a quiet network that kept the museum flowing smoothly. Later in the afternoon, Daniel found himself in the large history hall. It was busier now, with voices echoing softly through the wide space. He stood beside Morris, who happened to be on duty in that area. "You've been watching more closely today," Morris said, his eyes warm with approval. Daniel nodded. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. But I'm still not sure why the right foot is so important." Morris chuckled lightly. "Some things are easier to see when your eyes have learned to be patient." "You're getting there." Daniel wanted more explanation, but Morris didn't continue. Instead, he quietly observed a couple of visitors who were leaning close to a display case. Without speaking or moving his upper body much, Morris shifted his right foot, angling it slightly. A guard at the far end of the hall glanced over, understood the signal instantly, and stepped closer to that area in a friendly manner. The visitors moved on shortly after, completely unaware that a silent system had just adjusted itself around them. Daniel was amazed. He felt like he had been given a backstage pass to a hidden world, one that existed behind the peaceful smiles of the museum. Throughout the rest of the day, he continued to watch. The pattern grew clearer. Each right foot movement carried meaning. Sometimes it meant to be more attentive. Sometimes it meant everything was fine. Sometimes it simply helped another guard know where to look. By evening, Daniel felt like he had unlocked the first piece of a puzzle. He still didn't understand every signal, but he could finally see what Morris had meant. The museum's peaceful atmosphere wasn't just luck or good design. It was shaped by people who communicated without interrupting, who protected without alarming, and who worked together quietly to make sure every visitor felt safe and welcome. Walking out of the museum at the end of the day, Daniel felt more connected to the place than ever. He smiled to himself, feeling proud. He hadn't mastered the right foot language yet, but he had taken the first real step, and he couldn't wait to learn more. The museum always felt different in the evening. During the day, the halls were filled with voices, footsteps, and the soft rustling of visitors exploring every corner. But at night, everything turned gentle and quiet, almost like the building was taking a deep breath after a long day. The lights dimmed softly, the air cooled, and each sound echoed just a little longer than before. Daniel loved this shift without fully knowing why. Something about the peaceful atmosphere made him feel like the museum trusted him. On his third day, he had been assigned to help with evening rounds. It wasn't really security work, but he needed to learn how the museum operated during every hour. He felt honored, even though he was still new. The museum looked beautiful at night, and he was eager to see it in this new way. The evening began calmly. The last few visitors thanked the staff as they left, waving politely. Daniel helped guide them toward the exit and collected a few leftover brochures from benches. A soft yellow glow filled the lobby, giving everything a warm, calm appearance. When the final group stepped out and the doors gently clicked shut, the museum suddenly felt bigger, as if the empty space stretched farther than before. Morris walked over with his usual comforting presence. "Ready for your first evening shift?" he asked with a small smile. Daniel nodded, though he felt a slight flutter of nerves. "I think so." "You'll do fine," Morris said. "Night shifts are slower, but they teach you how to listen to the building and to yourself." Daniel didn't completely understand, but he liked the way Morris explained things. Everything the older guard said sounded simple but meaningful, as if each sentence was a small lesson. The shift began quietly. Daniel followed Morris through the galleries, checking lights, making sure display cases were sealed properly, and making small notes about anything that needed attention the next morning. Morris moved calmly, never in a rush, yet somehow aware of everything around them. Daniel tried to match that calmness, taking slow breaths as he walked. They passed through the sculpture wing first. The tall figures cast long shadows in the evening light, creating a gentle, dreamlike scene. Daniel paused for a moment to admire a marble statue that looked different than it did during the day. The soft lighting made it seem peaceful and almost alive. Morris noticed Daniel staring. "You'll see everything differently at night," he said kindly. "The quiet teaches you to notice things the daytime hides." Daniel nodded, appreciating the truth in those words. The silence felt comfortable, not empty. Every echo of their footsteps was soft, every whisper of the air gentle. They moved on to the next gallery, then another, checking each area carefully. The museum had a way of making time feel slower at night, stretching moments into something calm and steady. Daniel felt more relaxed with every room they walked through. After finishing most of their rounds, Morris assigned Daniel a simple task: helping organize labels and small display signs in a quiet office near the history hall. It wasn't difficult work, but it required attention so the labels didn't get mixed up. Daniel settled into a small desk, sorting through items and placing them neatly into different drawers. The clock ticked softly on the wall. The quiet sound blended perfectly with the stillness of the museum. Daniel found himself enjoying the task more than he expected. The simple rhythm of sorting helped him focus, and the peaceful atmosphere made the time pass in a gentle flow. After a while, he stood up to stretch. That was when he noticed something strange. The light above the hallway flickered faintly once. Then again, it wasn't a strong flicker, just a soft blink, like someone gently tapping a light switch. Daniel paused, listening. The hallway felt unusually quiet, even for the night shift. He stepped closer to the doorway, looking out into the long corridor. Everything seemed normal. The soft lights glowed steadily. The air felt still. He wondered whether the light flickering was simply a small electrical moment, something harmless and ordinary. But then, at the far end of the hallway, he saw a figure walking slowly. Daniel didn't feel afraid, just curious. He knew that a few staff members stayed late sometimes to finish paperwork or prepare for events. So, he assumed it was just another employee. The person walked gently, not in a rush, and disappeared around a corner. Daniel thought nothing more of it and returned to his task. Just as he sat down again, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. This time, the figure seemed closer. Passing quietly through another doorway, Daniel leaned slightly toward the hallway to get a better look. The person wasn't moving fast or doing anything unusual, they simply appeared to be wandering, perhaps checking something. Still, Daniel felt a small uncertainty settle in his mind. He had been told earlier that only a limited number of people remained in the building at night. It wasn't impossible for someone else to be here, but he couldn't remember seeing their face during the evening check-in. He glanced around, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to assume anything. He didn't want to call Morris for no reason either. Maybe the person simply needed help finding the right room. Then he saw Morris at the far end of the gallery. The senior guard hadn't noticed Daniel yet, but Daniel immediately relaxed at the familiar sight. Morris's calm presence made the whole hallway feel steady again. Daniel stepped slightly forward, planning to wave, when he noticed something small, something he had learned to watch for. Morris's right foot moved. It wasn't a big movement. It was slow, steady, and carefully placed. He angled it slightly to the left, holding it there for just a moment before taking another soft step. Daniel's breath caught. He knew now that these movements weren't random. They were messages, quiet ones, meant to share awareness without calling attention. Morris shifted his right foot again, this time a gentle backward slide, as if marking a tiny point on the floor. Daniel blinked, his heart beating faster but not from fear. From understanding, the movement meant something. The message was clear. Subtle. Peaceful. Stay where you are. Daniel froze gently. Not out of alarm, but out of trust. Morris wasn't tense. He wasn't rushing. His face was calm. His posture was relaxed. Whatever he had noticed, it wasn't an emergency. It was simply something that required quiet attention. Daniel stayed near the doorway, as the signal suggested. He watched Morris take a few more steps, moving with the same smooth flow as always. His movements were gentle but full of meaning, guiding the situation without a single spoken word. Morris approached the hallway slowly. He paused to observe, then walked toward the area where the figure had gone. Daniel waited patiently, remembering what Morris had said about listening to the building. For a moment, everything fell into a deep quiet. Then Daniel saw the same figure again. This time, Morris stepped forward with a calm smile, his posture open and welcoming. He spoke softly to the person, offering assistance. Daniel couldn't hear their conversation from where he stood, but the interaction looked friendly and simple, like a staff member gently helping someone who had wandered into the wrong area. The person nodded gratefully and walked back toward the main office with Morris guiding them kindly. There was no tension, no trouble, just a small misunderstanding quietly fixed with patience. Daniel felt a wave of admiration. He had seen the right foot code in action, not for danger, but for gentle communication. It wasn't about reacting to problems, it was about guiding situations before they became confusing. When Morris walked back toward him, Daniel couldn't help smiling. "I saw it," Daniel said softly. "Your right foot." Morris chuckled warmly. "And what did it tell you?" "To stay where I was," Daniel answered. "And you listened," Morris said, sounding pleased. "That's the first step. You're learning how to read the museum." Daniel felt proud. Not because he solved a problem, but because he understood something meaningful. He realized the right foot code wasn't dramatic, it was thoughtful. It helped keep the museum peaceful. It guided people quietly. It allowed the guards to work as a team without ever disturbing the beautiful calmness of the place. As they walked back through the hallway together, Daniel felt more connected to the museum than ever. He felt trusted. He felt included. He felt like he was becoming part of something gentle and important, something that worked silently in the background to keep the museum's heart steady. And he couldn't wait to learn the next signal. Daniel arrived at the museum the next morning feeling more confident than ever. Each day in the museum had taught him something new. But what happened the previous night stayed in his mind the most. He kept replaying that moment when Morris used only a quiet right foot signal to guide him. It felt magical, like being part of a secret that only a few people in the world knew. He couldn't stop thinking about it. As he walked inside, the soft morning light shined through the tall windows, filling the entrance with a warm glow. The cleaners finished their early tasks. The staff arranged brochures, and the guards prepared for their daily routes. Everything looked peaceful, but Daniel now understood that underneath this calmness was a world of silent communication, a world he was slowly being invited into. Helen greeted him with her bright smile. "Morning, Daniel. Ready for more learning?" "Definitely," he said with a small laugh. She handed him a small notebook. "You'll need this today. You're observing everything, not just what you see, but what it means." Daniel nodded seriously. He was ready. When the museum opened to visitors, the halls began to fill with soft voices and footsteps. A school group entered, followed by a few tourists taking pictures of the entrance. Daniel followed Helen into the main gallery, watching the way she quietly guided herself through the room. Visitors approached her to ask questions. She answered them kindly, her voice steady and welcoming. But even while speaking, her eyes scanned gently, making sure everything stayed smooth and comfortable for everyone. Daniel watched everything closely. He wanted to notice the things he had missed before, especially the right foot signals. A little while later, he saw it again, not from Helen, but from another guard across the room. The guard stood near a painting where a group of guests had gathered. He shifted his right foot slightly forward, then he held that position calmly. Daniel watched, trying to understand. Nothing seemed wrong. The guests were only admiring the painting, but then he realized, because the group stood very close to the artwork, the guard was simply signaling awareness. Not danger, not concern. Just a reminder to the other guards. Be observant in this area. One of the other guards responded by slowly walking closer, pretending to check a nearby brochure stand. The guests never noticed anything. They were too busy enjoying the art. Daniel felt a quiet excitement in his chest. He was starting to understand the language, and the more he saw, the more beautiful it seemed. The guards worked like a team without speaking, each movement supporting the other to keep the museum comfortable. As the day went on, Daniel began noticing even smaller gestures. A guard would turn their right foot slightly when approaching a crowded area, giving a silent message that they were taking the lead. Another would tap their right foot gently if they needed a partner to shift positions. The signals were soft, almost invisible, but powerful in their meaning. It amazed Daniel how something as simple as a foot movement could guide so much teamwork. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Helen moved to the museum's largest gallery, a wide hall filled with bright lights and displays that always attracted many visitors. It was one of the most active parts of the museum, especially during busy hours. The hall buzzed with families, students, and travelers exploring each section. Daniel enjoyed watching how smoothly everything flowed. Even with so many people around, it felt like the museum was a river, and the guards helped guide the current gently, making sure no part became too crowded. Morris entered the hall as well, his presence instantly adding a sense of balance. He gave a soft nod to Helen and Daniel, before taking his position near one of the tall sculptures. Daniel noticed the movement immediately. Morris's right foot angled outward by just a tiny degree. That gentle action felt like a small whisper of direction. Helen responded almost instantly, shifting herself closer to the center of the room. Another guard at the opposite side responded too, stepping into a spot that gave him a wider view. Daniel watched in awe. He didn't know exactly what triggered the signal. Perhaps the hall was becoming slightly too busy, or maybe someone needed a little more guidance. But the reaction happened smoothly, silently, and peacefully. The guards worked together like pieces of a quiet puzzle. For a moment, Daniel stood still, admiring how well the team communicated. He felt grateful to be witnessing something so subtle and meaningful. Then something new happened, something gentle but interesting. A young child wandered away from his parents and walked toward a decorative barrier near a display. It wasn't dangerous or alarming. The child was simply curious. As children often are, Daniel noticed it at the same time Helen did. But before either of them moved, Morris gently shifted his right foot backward. The movement was small and calm, but Daniel recognized the meaning immediately. "I see it. I'm guiding." Helen paused, understanding the message. Another guard on the other side nodded slightly and approached the area with a warm smile. The guard gently redirected the child back toward their parents, pointing out a nearby interactive screen the child might enjoy. The parents thanked her, relieved and grateful. The whole moment lasted only a few seconds. It was peaceful, simple, and beautifully handled. And all of it began with one small right foot signal. Daniel felt a warm admiration growing in his chest. This silent communication wasn't about controlling people. It was about caring for them, keeping the museum organized, comfortable, and safe, without ever disturbing the peaceful experience visitors came for. He took a slow breath, appreciating how elegant the system was. Throughout the next hour, Daniel observed more signals. He noticed how guards responded instantly, how they trusted each other without needing to speak, how they moved like a single, quiet team. It made him feel proud to be learning this skill. As the day slowly transitioned into the evening shift, the crowd grew lighter. The museum's lighting softened again, and the rooms became quieter. Daniel followed Morris during the last checks, making sure everything was ready for closing. The silence of the evening shift always felt special. The museum seemed calm and thoughtful, like a wise friend. While they walked through the corridors, Morris stopped near a small gallery entrance. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he placed his right foot gently forward, pointing toward the room. Daniel looked inside and saw a staff member collecting some supplies. The room felt calm and organized. "What does that signal mean?" Daniel asked softly. Morris smiled. "It simply means I'm acknowledging the area. It means everything is steady. No need to rush. No reason to worry. Tuerzam. No need to rush. Tuerzam." Daniel nodded, understanding more and more with each moment. Morris continued in his calm voice. "Sometimes the right foot means to watch. Sometimes it means to wait. Sometimes it means to help. And sometimes," he added, "it simply means to stay calm." Daniel thought about that. The right foot wasn't just a signal. It was a reminder, a message of steady awareness. A way to guide without interrupting. As they finished the last hallway, the museum felt completely at peace. Daniel felt connected to it in a way he never had before. He understood now that the right foot language wasn't a trick or a secret, it was a quiet art form, built from years of watching and learning. Before leaving for the night, Daniel turned to Morris with a grateful smile. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said softly. Morris nodded, his calm eyes reflecting the soft lights of the hall. "You're doing well, Daniel, and the more you watch, the more you'll see." Daniel walked out of the museum, feeling proud, wiser, and excited for what he would learn next. He felt like he was stepping deeper into a world of gentle awareness, a world where even the smallest movements could create harmony. He couldn't wait for tomorrow. Daniel woke up early the next morning with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. It wasn't excitement alone, and it wasn't nerves either. It was something gentle, like the warm glow of sunlight through a window. He felt connected to the museum in a way he had never expected. Every new lesson, every quiet moment, every tiny right foot signal had pulled him deeper into a world of silent communication and peaceful teamwork. Today was his last day of the week, and he hoped he would learn something meaningful again. As he walked through the large glass doors, the front desk staff greeted him with friendly smiles. The morning light filled the museum entrance, giving everything a soft shine. Even though the building was busy preparing for visitors, Daniel felt a sense of calmness inside himself. He had grown comfortable here. He felt like he belonged. He made his way to the security office where the guards were gathering. They greeted him like a familiar friend now. Helen waved happily. Thomas gave a friendly nod. And then there was Morris, standing beside the table as he usually did, holding a cup of tea and observing the room with wise, peaceful eyes. "Good morning, Daniel," Morris said warmly. "Good morning," Daniel replied, feeling a quiet pride that he was no longer just the new intern who didn't understand anything. "You've learned a lot this week," Morris said gently. Daniel smiled. "I feel like I see the museum differently now." "That's the first sign of growth," Morris said. "When your eyes learn to listen." Daniel liked that sentence so much that he repeated it in his mind. After the morning briefing, the guards began their routes, and Daniel joined Morris for the first half of the day. They walked through the museum slowly. Not because there was anything wrong, but because every detail mattered. Daniel watched the visitors, the exhibits, and the guards. He saw patterns he had never noticed before. Patterns in the flow of people, in the way guards positioned themselves, in the quiet exchanges of glances and foot signals. It amazed him how the right foot could send so many different messages. It could guide another guard, reassure a teammate, invite someone to assist, or simply acknowledge the peacefulness of the moment. Daniel felt proud every time he understood one of these movements. He felt like he was part of something graceful and important. Later in the day, Daniel was assigned to help in the large history hall, the same hall where he had first understood the meaning of the right foot. The hall was calm at the moment, with only a few visitors wandering through. Daniel stood near one of the displays, observing quietly. As he watched the room, his attention shifted from guard to guard. He noticed Thomas position himself near a corner where a small group was gathering. Daniel understood why Thomas wanted to make sure the group had enough space to explore comfortably. Then Daniel saw Helen gently shift her right foot when another group entered from the opposite side. The signal was clear. She was adjusting the flow, making sure the room didn't become too crowded. Daniel admired the harmony in their movements. It was like watching a dance that only the guards knew. A dance made from soft footsteps and quiet gestures. As the afternoon continued, the museum grew a little busier. A special tour arrived, bringing more visitors into the hall. The gentle hum of voices filled the room like soft music. Everything was still peaceful, but the flow of people needed gentle guiding. Daniel stood near the center, observing carefully. At that moment, he saw something that made him pause. Not danger, and not trouble, but a moment that needed quiet help. A visitor with a walking cane moved slowly through the hall, looking thoughtful but slightly unsure of their direction. Daniel wanted to help, but he remembered what he had learned. He needed to be aware, but he also needed to understand the signals around him before stepping in. He looked around. Morris had just entered the hall. Helen was greeting a visitor near the entrance. Thomas was walking toward the opposite side. Daniel watched Morris closely, waiting to see if he would signal something. And then it happened. Morris gently angled his right foot toward the visitor with the cane. The message was soft but clear. Gentle support. Daniel took a steady breath and approached the visitor with a kind smile. "Hello," he said softly. "Is there a section you would like help finding?" The visitor looked relieved. "Oh, yes. I'm trying to find the early history exhibits." "They're just through this doorway," Daniel said, pointing with a calm gesture. "I can walk with you if you'd like." "That would be lovely," the visitor replied warmly. Daniel walked slowly beside them, matching their pace naturally. They talked softly about the displays and the beautiful museum lighting. When they reached the early history wing, the visitor thanked him sincerely. "You're very attentive," they said with a smile. "This museum is lucky to have people like you." Daniel felt his heart warm at the words. As he walked back into the main hall, He saw Morris watching him with a proud expression. "You read the signal well," Morris said softly. "I'm learning from the best," Daniel replied. "You're not just learning," Morris said. "You're becoming part of the museum's quiet rhythm." Daniel felt a gentle happiness fill him. It wasn't the kind of happiness that made someone jump or cheer, it was the kind that settled deep inside, steady and warm. As the day went on, Daniel continued observing, assisting, and understanding. Every right foot movement made more sense to him. Every small gesture revealed a new layer of the museum's silent system. He didn't need to ask questions anymore. He knew how to watch, how to listen, and how to feel the room. By evening, when the museum began to empty and the lights softened once again, Daniel and Morris walked together through the quiet halls. The echo of their footsteps felt familiar, like walking with a mentor through a place that had become a second home. They reached the sculpture wing, where the tall figures stood like quiet guardians. Morris paused for a moment, looking around the peaceful room. "You know," Morris said gently, "when I first started working here, someone taught me the same right foot signals. I didn't understand them right away either, but with time, I learned that the museum has its own language, a quiet language, a language of care." Daniel listened, absorbing every word. "You learned it well," Morris continued. "And you learned it with patience, not rush. That's what makes you good at this." Daniel felt his eyes soften with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "It means more than you know." Morris smiled. The museum needs people who see quietly, people who notice the small things, people who care. They walked a little more, checking the final areas. Everything was calm and ready for closing. Before they left, Morris placed his right foot lightly forward. No signal for work, no message for others. Just a small gesture, a gentle symbol. Daniel smiled, understanding without needing words. It meant, everything is peaceful. As they walked out of the museum together, Daniel looked back one last time at the quiet entrance, glowing under the evening lights. He felt proud, grateful, and full of a deep calm. He had arrived at the museum as a beginner, unsure of himself, unaware of the quiet world around him. But he was leaving this week as someone who understood the silent rhythm of the place, someone who could read a signal softer than a whisper, someone who could guide without speaking, someone who had learned the language of the right foot. And he knew this was only the beginning, because now, he didn't just work at the museum, he belonged to it, and the museum, calm, gentle, and full of silent wisdom, belonged to him too.